What started as a hopeful new chapter of quiet independence quickly unraveled into a distressing, ongoing ordeal fueled by unbridled prejudice and baseless suspicion. What I thought would be a peaceful, fresh start in my very first apartment turned into a relentless nightmare of false accusations, targeted surveillance, and eventually an unwarranted, dangerous police intervention. This experience opened my eyes to how quickly small community conflict can spiral out of control, leaving lasting emotional harm and tangled legal complications in its wake, all because a stranger chose to judge and target me before knowing a single thing about my life. It all began the second I started unloading boxes into my new apartment, when a woman came marching straight across the parking lot like she owned every inch of the asphalt. Zero hesitation, zero courtesy, and every ounce of unearned authority. I'd spent 18 months grinding to get to this day. As a full-time clinical lab technician based in suburban Atlanta, I'd worked endless overtime shifts, skipped vacations, and stuck to a strict monthly budget, saving every spare dollar to lease my own space. After years of crashing on friends' couches and splitting cramped rental homes with strangers, this small second-floor apartment in a quiet garden complex was my first real taste of stability. It wasn't luxurious, just simple, clean, and entirely mine. A place where I could finally settle down, breathe easy, and live without compromise. The morning had gone smoothly at first. A few friends helped me haul my heavier furniture up the stairs before their work shifts started, leaving me to handle the smaller boxes through the afternoon. The Georgia air was thick and sticky with summer humidity, clinging to my skin as I moved back and forth between my parked truck and the second-floor walkway. Sweat dampened my shirt, but I didn't mind the exhaustion. Every box I carried, every item I unpacked, felt like a victory after years of scraping and saving for this moment. I was bending down to lift a cardboard box labeled kitchen supplies, my fingers wrapping around the worn cardboard edge, when I heard sharp, deliberate footsteps cutting across the empty parking lot. Most neighbors in the complex kept to themselves. People headed to work, running errands or loading groceries into their cars with quiet, hurried neutrality. These footsteps were different. They were loud, obsessive, and filled with unspoken irritation, like the person marching toward me was already ready to. I straightened up and turned, and my first sight of Brenda Hale stopped me. She was in her late 50s, a long-term resident of the complex with short gray hair pulled tight and a faded complex polo shirt stretched over her. Her face was set in a hard, unyielding soul, her eyes sweeping over me slowly and judgmentally, like I was an intruder trespassing on private property rather than a new tenant moving into my legally. I offered a polite, tentative smile, determined to start my new neighborhood experience on good terms. "Hi, I'm Mia Reed. I just moved into Unit 14. Sorry if the moving noise bothered." She didn't introduce. She didn't acknowledge my She just crossed her arms over her chest, her stare sharp and unforgiving, and let out a cold dismay. "I saw that moving truck first morning. You've been making a rush all day, and nobody around here knows who you are or what you're bringing in." I blinked in shock. My smile faded instantly. I kept the noise down as much as I could. All my movers were gone by 3 o'clock, and I'm just finishing up small boxes now. I'm only moving my personal belongings. Furniture, clothes, house items. Nothing else. "That's what everyone says," she shot back immediately, her tone sharp and accusatory. New people roll in unannounced, haul in unmarked boxes, and act like they're just here for life. I've lived in this complex for 7 years. I know what normal looks like, and this, she gestured dismissively at a truck. Her words hung heavy in air, layered with a quiet, unspoken bias that settled over me like. There was no logical reason for suspicion. I was a working professional with a steady job, a clean rental history, and legitimate paperwork for my new unit. I'd broken no rules, disturbed no one, and done nothing to warrant her. Yet from the second laid eyes on me, she'd already written me as suspicious, untrustworthy, out of place. I fought to keep my voice unreasonable, refusing to stoop to her confrontational level. I pay bills on time, I work full-time at Piedmont Hospital, and I plan on health here. I'm not looking for trouble, and I don't want any. If you have legitimate concerns, you can reach out to property management to verify my lease and background, but I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't make unfound about me. She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Paperwork doesn't mean anything. People like you don't just move into quiet complexes out of nowhere without a reason. You're disrupting the peace for years. The phrase "people like you" landed like a weight, clear, unmistakable. In that moment, I understood this was never about noise, unmarked boxes, or neighborhood peace. It was about prejudice. Blind, unfair suspicion directed at me simply for buzz and how I looked. moving into a space claimed as her own. I didn't waste any more energy arguing with closed-minded mindset. I bent back down, lifted the kitchen box, toward the stairwell, determined to finish moving and put this unper behind me. I could feel her eyes burning into my back the way up the stairs, relenting and judgmental, like she was already cataloging every one of my movements for future scrutiny. Once I stepped inside my empty apartment and clicked the lock shut behind me, I finally let out I'd been holding. Space was bright and blank, full of endless potential quiet life I'd dreamed of, felt tainted. My chest tightened with frustration and unease. My ear fast. I walked to the front window and through the thin blinds, my heart sinking when I saw her still standing in the exact same spot in the parking lot. She wasn't leaving. She wasn't going inside. She was staring straight up at my second-floor unit, waiting, watching, and all her next move against me. I moved here to escape conflict, judgment, and the endless pressure to prove my worth to others. But in a single, tense parking lot confrontation, I'd learned a brutal truth. My going to be peaceful. It was already under attack by a neighbor fueled by irrational, provoked resentment. It was only the very beginning. I spent the rest of my first night in the new apartment trying to reclaim the hope I'd lost in that parking lot confrontation. After locking my door and closing the blinds, I busied myself with unpacking essentials, lining up my toiletries in the bathroom, assembling my small dining table, and making up my bed with fresh sheets. The apartment was quiet, clean, and exactly what I'd worked so hard for. I told myself repeatedly that Brenda's hostility was a one-time outburst, the bitter attitude of a long-term resident who hated change. I refused to let one toxic stranger ruin the fresh start I'd sacrificed so much to build. By the time I fell asleep, I'd almost convinced myself things would calm down. I planned to keep to myself, be polite to every neighbor, follow all complex rules, and prove that I was just a quiet, responsible tenant. There was no reason for her to keep fixating on me once she saw I posed no trouble at all. But when I woke up early the next morning, I quickly realized her suspicion was never temporary. It was obsessive, and it was only going to get worse. I left my unit at 8 a.m. for my weekday shift at the hospital lab, my work bag slung over one shoulder, coffee in hand. The second-floor outdoor walkway was quiet, the Atlanta morning air mild and dewy before the summer heat rolled in. Halfway to the stairwell, my footsteps faltered. Brenda was standing at the far end of the walkway, leaning against the metal railing, doing nothing but watching my door. She wasn't exercising, collecting mail, or tending to plants. She was simply waiting, positioned perfectly to monitor my every move. When our eyes locked, she showed zero embarrassment. She didn't look away, didn't pretend to be busy, didn't offer a polite greeting. She just held my gaze with the same cold, suspicious stare from the day before, her rigid posture making it clear she had been posted there long before I stepped outside. A sharp, uneasy chill ran down my spine. This was not casual, neighborly curiosity. This was targeted surveillance. I hurried down the stairs, my mind racing the entire drive. I'd experienced unfair judgment and bias before in small doses, but never had a complete stranger dedicated their time to tracking my movements before even learning my name or my character. It felt invasive, unsettling, and deeply unfair. All I wanted was to live peacefully in the home I finished my lab shift exhausted and tense, already dreading returning to the complex. My anxiety was not unfounded. When I pulled into the parking lot that evening, I spotted Brenda immediately. She stood at her ground floor window, peering through slatted blinds, her focus fixed directly on my parking spot as I pulled in and cut the engine. The second I stepped out of the truck, she disappeared like she was rushing to reposition herself to keep walking. Tired of feeling powerless and paid, I decided to stop by the leasing office to address the situation. I hoped speaking to management would settle tension, create an official record, and encourage Brenda. The office was quiet, only Carter, the overworked property manager, wrapping up his end-of-day. He looked up with a weary, sympathetic expression the moment and I knew instantly he already knew why. Sighed, leaning back in his chair. I was going to tell you today. I received a formal resident complaint about your unit yesterday afternoon. It's from Mrs. Hale. My shoulders dropped frustration. Complaint? I moved out all heavy equipment and loud movers by mid-afternoon. I didn't host guests, didn't blast music, didn't cause any disruption whatsoever. What exactly is she complaining about? Jesse glanced down at his digital report, his tone apologetic. She's not citing noise violation, rule breaks. Her complaint states you've been conducting suspicious activity in the parking lot, moving unmarked containers to the building, and acting evasive. She's claiming your presence creates an unknown safety risk for lots. I stared at him in pure disbelief. Containers? Those are just moving boxes. Everyone uses plain boxes when they move. That's not suspicious, that's normal. I have a fully verified lease, background check, and renter's insurance on file with your office. I'm a full-time hospital employee with a clean record. There is risk here. I know that. And I've already noted there's no valid concern. She assured me quickly. I'm not penalizing you, and this complaint won't record. But Mrs. Hale has lived here 7 years. She's a persistent complainer, and company policy forces me to document resident submission, no matter how vague or unsubstantiated it is. I just wanted to warn you she's you. His words left me feeling hollow and unprotected. I'd moved into this complex seeking the instability, but the very system meant to protect tenants was allowing a bitter neighbor to manufacture a false narrative about me ability. Brenda just being rude. She was building a paper trail of lying as dangerous, all to validate her own assumptions. In the days that followed, her surveillance grew bolder and more unrelenting. She lingered by the mail kiosk every time I grabbed letters. She loitered near the stairwell during my evening routines. If I stepped onto my second-floor balcony for fresh air, I'd catch her staring upward from the lower walkway, studying my every quiet action. It got to the point where I could feel her eyes and saw her. Desperate to avoid further confrontation, I began rearranging my entire life around her paranoia. I left for work 30 minutes after morning watch. I came home well after dark to skip peak resident hours. I stopped using my balcony entirely, and only checked my mail late at night when the complex walkways were empty. I hated that I was altering my hide in my own home, but I had too much to lose. A bad tenant report, or a fabricated disturbance claim could ruin my rental history and jeopardizing opportunities. I vented endlessly to my best friend Kayla every night over the phone, my stress mounting daily. Obsessed with me for no reason, I told her, packed living room. I haven't to her since our first fight. I keep to myself, follow every rule, my every move. Kayla's advice was firm and urgent. Stop hoping she'll back off on her own. Her don't stop, they escalate. You need to start documenting everything. Log reciting, every complaint, every time she loiters outside your door. Save every conversation with management, when she takes this further. Her words snapped me out of my passive conflict of mindset. That night, I opened a detailed log on my phone, began recording every incident. Dates, exact times, location, Brenda's surveillance. By the end of the week, I had 7 distinct entries, all proving a concern of targeted harassment. I'd thought creating a trail would make me feel safer, control of the situation. But late that night, as I sat on my couch my notes in the damp light, I heard them, slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps echoing across the empty secway outside my front door. The foot directly in front of my unit. There was no knock, no voice, no movement, only thick, suffocating silence that stretched endless, terrifying seconds. My heart hammered wildly in my throat as I froze on the couch, too scared to approach the peephole, hyper-aware of how isolated and vulnerable I was in the quiet, empty building after hours. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps finally resumed, dragging slowly down the walkway into the night. I sat in the dark for hours, staring at my locked front door, a cold, unshakable certainty settling over me. This was no longer suspicion or petty resentment. Brenda's fixation was unending, her harassment intentional, and her made my privacy boundless. The peace I'd dreamed of was never coming. I found a way to stop her first. And deep down, I already knew she was nowhere near done fighting with me. After hearing those slow, deliberate footsteps pause outside my door late the night before, I knew I could no longer pretend this conflict would fade on its own. My quiet strategy of keeping my head down, avoiding eye contact, and altering my entire routine to stay out of Brenda's path had only emboldened her. She was not just a cranky, long-term resident bothered by new tenants. She was actively determined to paint me as suspicious, untrustworthy, and dangerous, simply because I was new, different, and occupying a space she'd decided belonged only to her. The next morning, I stopped trying to outweigh the problem and started building my defense. I compiled every dated entry from my phone log, every note of her surveillance, every uncomfortable run-in, and every conversation I'd had with Jessie, the property manager. I formatted it all into a clean chronological document, creating a clear paper trail that proved I was the one being harassed, not the one causing trouble. My hope was simple. If Brenda kept filing false complaints, I would have official proof to push back and clear my name with apartment management. I brought the printed folder to the leasing office before my hospital shift, walking in with calm, steady resolve. Jesse was behind his desk, scrolling through resident tickets, and he looked up with immediate exhaustion when he saw me. He already knew why I was there. He'd already received 2 more unsubstantiated complaints submitted under Brenda's name over the past 48 hours. She's claiming you have unknown people coming and going after dark, Jesse explained reluctantly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. She says your vehicle schedule is erratic, that you carry opaque bags in and out of the building, and that your overall behavior makes other residents feel unsafe. None of it adds up, but I have to log every submission. I stared at him in quiet disbelief. I worked a fixed Monday through Friday hospital lab schedule, left home at 7 each morning, and returned after 7 each night. I almost never had guests. The only opaque bags I carried were grocery totes and work coolers for lab samples. Every single claim she'd made was twisted, exaggerated, or completely fabricated, but it still counted as an official resident concern in the system. I slid my folder across his desk. I've documented every single time she's watched me, loitered near my door, or targeted me since moving. She's the one following me. She's the one fixating. I haven't disturbed a single neighbor. Jesse flipped through my pages, his expression softening into genuine sympathy. I believe you, Mia, honestly. I've dealt with Brenda for... She fixates on new tenants until she manufactures a reason to feel threatened. The problem is corporate policy. I can't issue a formal warning or disciplinary action without concrete rule-breaking evidence. Loitering, staring, and vague resident suspicion aren't violations I can... His words landed heavy and helpless. The system was structured to protect long-term residents with vague safety concerns, while offering zero protection to new tenants being quietly. Brenda would lie, speculate, and smear my reputation endlessly, and management would log every word. While my detailed proof of her obsessive behavior was labeled a personal dispute and filed away with. Over the next weeks, Brenda grew bolder, no longer hiding her fixation behind windows and subs. She stood openly in the parking lot and watched me on liveries. She slowed her walk every time she passed my second unit, tilting her head to peer through the gap in my... She started speaking in hushed tones to other residents by the mailboxes, stairwells, shooting pointed looks in my direction whenever by. Slowly but surely, the entire complex atmosphere shifted against me. Neighbors who once offered quick smiles now looked away. Dog walkers crossed the pavement to avoid passing. The quiet, neutral community I'd moved into curdled into quiet trust, all based entirely on Brenda's unspoken rumors and relentless campaign. Desperate for resolution, I begged Jesse to mediate, to speak to one-on-one, to clarify that I was a verified, rule-abiding tenant with a clean record and steady career. Jesse agreed to try an informed conversation, but he warned me it would likely be worse. She corrected. He told me frankly. She sees pushback proof she's right, that new tenants are defense something. Talking to her will just validate her paranoia. He was right. The day after Jesse spoke to her, Brenda's complaints escalated from vague discomfort to targeted instructions. She began timing my arrivals and departures, noting every minor variation in my schedule and reporting it as suspicious activity. She even claimed I was avoiding eye contact, evasive, framing my conflict-avoidant personality proof of guilt. Worst of all, I discovered a terrifying loophole buried deep in my lease agreement late one night while researching tenant rights. The apartment complex retained full authority to label any tenant a continuous source of resident conflict, issue fines, lease warnings, or even initiate eviction proceedings, regardless of harassment. In the corporate policy, ongoing drama alone was enough to penalize a tenant. Panic settled deep in my chest. I'd worked years for this apartment, sacrificed overtime hours, skipped vacations, and budgeted rigorability. I could lose everything because one neighbor chose to weaponize systemic bias and loose up me. I called my friend Kayla that night, my voice tight with suppressed frustration. She's not bothering me anymore. She's building a case against me, lie at a time. And Kayla's tone sharp and urgent, longer just sympathetic. You prepare for her next move. If she's comfortable lying to management this aggressively, she's not going to stop at paperwork. People like her escalate beyond complete unchallenged. Her warning lingered in my mind long after our call ended. I'd thought the peak of this nightmare was the late-night footsteps outside my door, or the quiet during tenants. I'd believed documentation and patience clear my name. But Brenda, tired of the conflict, started. 2 nights later, on a quiet, assuming Tuesday evening, I was home alone folding laundry in the living room. My doors were locked, my windows closed, my entire routine quiet and unremarkable. I was doing nothing that could be twisted into suspicion, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that justified attention. Yet just after 9 p.m., The distant wail of sirens through the calm suburban night. The sound grew louder, clearer, and more with every passing second. Closing apartment building. My blood ran cold as I froze mid-movement, my hands a folded towel. In that terrifying moment, I knew exactly what was happening. Brenda had finally moved beyond complaints to the one escalation could destroy my life entirely. She had called the police. The sound of approaching sirens drowned out every other thought in my head. Up until that night, Brenda's harassment had felt small, contained to office complaints, quiet stares, and whispered rumors. It was cruel and exhausting, but it was still neighborhood drama. The second those sirens sliced through the dark, everything shifted. What started as petty suspicion had officially turned into a life-altering crisis. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room, my hands still clutching a folded sweatshirt, my heart slamming so hard I've always been careful around police. As a black woman living in suburban Georgia, I was raised to be hyper-vigilant, polite, and unassuming during any law enforcement interaction. I knew how quickly a false report, a biased assumption, or a stranger's accusation could tip a routine visit into something dangerous. I straightened my clothes, smoothed my hair, and walked slowly to the door, forcing my hands to steady as I reached for the lock. A firm, sharp knock echoed through my quiet apartment. Atlanta PD. Open the door. I unlocked and pulled the door open slowly, keeping my hands visible at my sides. 2 uniformed officers stood in the hallway, one older and calm, the other younger and tense, their gazes sweeping quickly over my entryway and into my living room. Their body language was cautious, alert, prepared for trouble, all because Brenda had lied. "Good evening, ma'am," the senior officer said evenly. "We received a 911 call from a resident in the building reporting suspicious and possibly illegal activity originating from this unit. The caller stated there are frequent unknown visitors, possible concealed contraband, and erratic resident behavior posing a safety risk to the complex." Each word landed like a blow. It was the exact fabricated narrative Brenda had been feeding management for weeks, now escalated into an official police emergency report. She'd taken her petty, baseless complaints and weaponized them into a public safety allegation that put my rental status and my reputation on the line. I kept my voice calm and despite the terror racing through my chest. "I have no idea who made that call, but none of that is. I live here alone. I work full-time as a clinical lab technician at Piedmont Hall. I keep a fixed schedule. I rarely have guests, and I have zero illegal activity in my home. I've had ongoing issues with a neighbor in this complex who's been filing unsubstantiated reports about me since the day I met," the senior officer said, his expression softening. No longer immediately guarded. "We're required to respond to all emergency calls and conduct a wellness and safety. Mind if we step inside and take a quick look around to clean it?" I agreed. I had nothing to hide, and I knew a full walkthrough was the fastest way to disprove Brenda. I stepped aside and lent her, watching as they scanned my ordinary apartment, my neatly folded laundry couch, my work bag by the door, my plain kitchen countertops. No strangers, no suspicious items, no signs of any concern. As they checked the room, I pulled out my phone and pulled up my weeks-long document log. I showed them every time-stamped entry, every instance of Brenda loitering outside my door, every surveillance sighting in the parking lot, every false complaint filed with property management. I laid out the full pattern, explaining how she'd fixated on me for a day, spread rumors through tenants, and gradually escalated her harassment with zero provocation. The officers reviewed mine quietly, exchanging a knowing glance with one another. It was clear they'd dealt with this exact scenario before. Disgruntled long-term residents weaponizing police resource target new neighbors out of paranoia. "We see no cause for concern here whatsoever," the senior officer confirmed once their walkthrough was complete. "Your home is clear, your story is consistent, and this report appears to be unfounded. We'll document this as a false alarm and close immediately." Relief crashed over me in a shaky, overwhelming wave. I'd been cleared. I wasn't in trouble. No report would mar my record. No legal consequences would follow. But the relief didn't last long, replaced quickly by cold. I watched the officers walk back down the walkway and head patrol cars, and I knew too. She'd just witnessed the police show up at my door, respond to her call, and quickly. Even though I'd been fully cleared, she'd gotten what she wanted. Validation that her lies could summon a step. She'd learned she had the power to disrupt my life, terrify me, to force me to defend my own home. And there was nothing stopping. That night, long after the police cars left and the quiet again, I sat on my couch unable to sleep. Lights were gone. Officers were gone. initial scare was over, but the fear lingered, permanent. I realized I could no longer rely on luck, management, or even protect me. I needed proof, tangible, irrefutable harassment. Before she made an even worse, more serious accusation, first thing the next morning, I ordered a high-definition doorbell camera with 24-hour motion recording. I installed it myself that evening, mounting it above my front door, angled to capture every inch of the second floor of my unit. That night, I pulled up the camera's first night to test its clarity. What I saw froze tracks. Hours after the police left, long after the complex was asleep, Brenda stood alone in the shadowed walk outside my door. She wasn't walking by, wasn't checking mail, wasn't passing through. She stood completely still, motionless, staring straight at my apartment entrance for minutes on end, watching, waiting, her next move. Watching Brenda stand motionless in the shadows outside my door on camera left me shaken to my core. It was one thing to suspect she was obsessed with me. It was another to watch cold, undeniable footage proving she was willing to lurk in the dead of night, studying my unit long after the police had already cleared me of every false accusation she'd invented. That video wasn't just random creep behavior. It was premeditated surveillance, proof she had no intention of backing down. I saved and backed up the footage 3 separate times that night. Cloud storage, external drive, and my phone's encrypted folder. After weeks of fighting with nothing but written logs and word-of-mouth accounts, I finally had hard visual evidence. For a brief moment, I thought the camera alone would level the playing field. I believed that if she tried anything else, I could simply show the footage to management or police, and they would finally see her for the harasser she was. I quickly learned how wrong I was. Brenda didn't stop after the police visit. She pivoted. If calling the cops didn't take me down, she would destroy my reputation in the complex instead. She began working the neighborhood like a quiet campaign, planting seeds of doubt in every resident she could find. She lingered by the mailboxes in the morning when people were heading to work. She chatted with neighbors walking their dogs after dinner. She stopped strangers in the parking lot, all with the same casual, concerned tone. I never heard her say anything outright malicious. She never yelled accusations or started dramatic fights. That was her genius. She weaponized subtly. She'd sigh, shake her head, and mention the new girl on the second floor with a worried look. She'd reference the police visit without context, letting people fill in the blanks on their own. She'd mutter out unusual hours and unexplained behavior, turning her own fabricated paranoia into community gossip. The shift in how people treated me was immediate, and before, residents were neutral. Polite smiles, quick nods, the quiet distance typical of apartment complex. Now, they avoided me entirely. A mom with a stroller would cross the walkway to keep her distance. Men working from home would glance out their windows and pull their blinds shut when I stepped onto my balcony. Even the elderly resident who always waved at everyone stopped making eye contact. I could feel the weight of their unspoken judgments every time I left. No one confronted me. No one asked me for my side of the story. They simply accepted Brenda's version of that I was suspicious, that the police had been right to show up door, that I must be hiding something dangerous to warrant that kind of. The stress seeped into every part. I stopped eating properly. I struggled to sleep at night, hyper-aware of every faint footstep out. I grew distraught at work, my mind constantly drifting back to the wondering what new rumors Brenda was spreading, who she'd into, what new lie she'd planned. For the first time in my adult life, my stable, routine world unmoored. The safe, peaceful home I'd sacrificed so much to build had turned into a hostile environment where I was guilty until desperate for real answers and action. I called a free tenant legal aid hotline recommended. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with a legal advisor, laying detail, the weak surveillance, the false man complaints, the baseless call, the nightly loitering, and the community-wide smear campaign. I hoped the attorney would tell me I had a clear case of harassment, that I could file a formal report, that Brenda would face consequences for hitting me. Instead, her response left me. Georgia's criminal harassment statute has an extremely high bar, she explained calmly. Vague surveillance, loitering, rumors, and unsubstantiated complaints aren't enough charges. She hasn't trespassed, hasn't you directly, hasn't stalked you off complex property, and hasn't caused verifiable physical harm. Legally, she's operating in a loophole. It's unethical, it's cruel, it's harassment in a practical sense. I sat silently on my couch, absorbed. All my evidence, all my logs, all my video footage, none of it was enough to full action. Brenda knew exactly where the line was, and how to stay barely behind it, all while ruining quality of life. She's abusing the system, and there was nothing legal to stop her. Still, render. If the law couldn't punish her, it could at least document her pattern. I doubled down my evidence collection. I saved every single doorbell camera clip, timestamped loitering incident, and cross-referenced each sighting with the fault filed. I built a complete chronological archive against me. Hundreds of pages of proof showing a consistent, relentless pattern of harassment. Kayla with me every night, furious on my behalf and shocked by how little protection the system offered. She's bullying you because she can get away with it. One evening. She's banking on you breaking first. Don't give her the satisfaction. Keep recording everything. Sooner or later she'll slip up. Kayla was right. Growing overconfident. Emboldened by the lack of consequences and the community's growing distrust of me, her behavior became bolder, more reckless, let hide her fixation. For 3 straight nights, my doorbell camera captured her lingering inside my unit after dark. Some nights she stood alone, staring at my door for 5, 10, 15 minutes at a time. Other nights she paced slowly and forth across the walkway, her head tilted up toward my windows, checking if my lights were on, tracking my inside my own home. I watched the clips every morning, my anxiety spiking higher with each new recording. I wasn't dealing with a rude neighbor anymore. I was being stalked in my own home, trapped in a lease, trapped in a building, trapped by legal loopholes that favored a malicious over an innocent one. Then came again. Close to 11 p.m., and I'd finally managed to fall asleep after hours of restless tossing and turning. The apartment was dark and quiet, the complex still and calm around me. I'd disabled my phone's non-essential notifications to sleep undisturbed, but my doorbell camera's emergency motion alert was set to override every setting, the only safety net I had left. The phone blared to life on my nightstand, vibrating violently, jolting exhausted sleep. My heart lurched in my throat as I fumbled for the device, my eyes bleary and panicked. The screen glowed bright with a motion alert notification, and up instantly. I was standing directly outside my door, her phone raised to her ear, face tight and furious. Loitering or staring this time. She was talking fast, gesturing sharply toward my unit, which urgent and aggressive. In that split second, I knew exactly what was happening. She wasn't just watching me anymore. She was on the phone with 911 again, a new, more urgent lie. One desiring police crashing back to my door, and this time determined to make it stick. The glow of my phone screen lit up my trembling face as I stared at the live feed. Brenda stood inches from my front door, ranting into her phone, her hands flying in sharp, exaggerated gestures as she spoke. I did not need to hear her words to know she was painting the most damning version of me possible. After weeks of failed complaints, community gossip, and one dismissed police visit, she was desperate to manufacture an emergency serious enough that officers would not just knock and leave. This was no longer paranoia. This was deliberate, premeditated retaliation. Pure adrenaline jolted through my body, burning away every trace of sleep. I scrambled out of bed, my feet silent on the carpet, and rushed to confirm my camera was recording steadily, capturing every second of her aggressive loitering and frantic call. For months, I'd been the one forced to explain myself, to prove my innocence, to beg for basic fairness. Now, for the first time, every single one of her destructive choices was being documented in crisp, unarguable detail. Within minutes, the familiar wail of sirens cut through the quiet night air, growing louder and closer at a terrifying speed. The sound used to fill me with sheer terror, a reminder of how easily a stranger's lies could upend my life. But this time I felt only cold, steady resolve. I had proof. I had context. I had weeks of archived footage tracing every step of her targeted harassment. For once, I was not walking into this confrontation blind and defenseless. 2 patrol cars pulled into the parking lot below, red and blue lights strobing across my windows, illuminating the dark living room in flickering flashes. Heavy, authoritative footsteps thundered up the stairwell and across the second-floor hallway. I watched through the peephole as Brenda immediately turned to meet the officers, her entire demeanor shifting in an instant. The furious, hostile woman on my camera replaced by a frail, concerned elderly neighbor wearing a mask of perfect worry, and it was a masterclass in manipulation. She pointed directly at me, her voice shaky and vulnerable, nodding intently as she spoke to the officers. From where I stood, I could see her gesturing wildly at my windows, mimicking loud noises and clutching her chest like she was genuinely terrified for her safety. She was performing, crafting a vivid fake emergency to convince the police I was unstable and dangerous behind my lock. I took a breath, unlocked my door slowly, and stepped outside with my phone in hand. my voice calm and unshaken before the officers could even knock. "Officers, thank you for coming. I have full video documentation of what just happened, and I can explain." Both officers turned toward me, their posture alert and neutral. Before I could speak further, Brenda cut in, her voice trembling with feigned anxiety. "These past few hours have been trying. The yelling, the slang noises, the repeated thuds from inside. I was sure something terrible happening. She was hurt, worse, that she was hurting someone else. I had no choice but..." Her lie was bold, unhesitating, and perfectly crafted to put sympathy. She positioned herself as a caring, vigilant neighbor, acting with concern, while framing me as an erratic, volatile threat lurking. It was the exact narrative she'd been building to management and the community for months, now amplified into a formal police. I did not let her false narrative stand for it. I took my phone, pulled up the live timeline, and held it out for the officer to see clearly. My apartment has been complete all night. I was asleep until your sirens woke me. This doorbell camera records continuous motion and audio. There are 0 loud noises, 0 slamming sounds, 0 signs of disturbance from my unit. What it does record, I continued steadily, sliding the timeline back to minutes before their arrival, is Mrs. Hale standing outside my door for 10 minutes, aggressively making false claims on her phone, staring into my home, and fabricating the emergency. Officers leaned in, watching the footage intently as Brenda's performative panic crumbled right in front of them. The video was undeniable. It showed her furious expression, her sharp, frantic gestures, her prolonged loitering outside private property, none of the fear and helplessness I feel. The audio confirmed complete silence from my apartment the entire time she'd been lying about and violence. Her instantly. The shaky vulnerability vanished, replaced by red-faced frustration and defensiveness. "That's taken out of context," she snapped, her tone sharp and unhinged, no longer caring to mean her innocent act. "I know what I heard. This tenant has a history of suspicious behavior in this complex. Everyone knows. I'm not lying." "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, audio on screen. "The footage is clear and unedited. There is no noise, no disturbance, no emergency of any kind from this unit. Your verbal report directly physical evidence." I seized the moment to lay out the full timeline for them, connecting every piece of her months-long campaign. I explained the initial parking lot confrontation, the endless stream of baseless management complaints, the community rumors she'd spread neighbors against me, the nightly surveillance, and the previous false police call that had already been closed as a non-issue. I showed them my archived logs, my time-stamped evidence, weeks of proof that this was a related mistake. It was a repeated pattern of targeted harassment and false emergency reports. The senior officer's expression hardened with understand as he processed the full story. He turned to Brenda, serious and authoritative. "Filing a knowingly false police report is a serious offense in Georgia. Wastes department resources, endangers public safety, and unjustly targets a civilian with baseless law enforcement scrutiny. This is not a neighborhood dispute. This is emergency services." For the first time in months, Brenda was not in control. She was caught red-handed, her lies exposed, loophole finally closed. She had spent weeks staying just barely on the right side of policy and her subtle harassment. But her pushed her too far. This was what Kayla had warned me about, the irreversible mistake that would finally dynamic in my favor. The officers gave her a formal warning on the spot, documenting the false report, the contradictory video evidence, and her long pattern of unfounded accusations against me in the official police record. They made it clear that any further false calls or targeted harassment would result in official citations and legal consequences. They closed the emergency call officially in my favor, clearing my name eyes of law enforcement. After the officers left, the complex fell heavy, tense silence. Brenda lingered in the walkway for a long moment, shooting me a bitter, hateful stare before the ground floor unit. The masks were fully gone now. There was no more concerned neighbor act, no more subtle suspicion, no more quiet gossip, masked resentment. I stood alone on the walkway, the cool night air brushing my face, my heart still high-stakes confrontation. I'd won this battle. I'd cleared my name, exposed her lies, and secured official proof of her harassment. But I locked my door and leaned back against it. I knew the conflict was not truly over. Brenda had lost control of her narrative tonight, and her never accept defeat quietly. She would not keep her petty complaints anymore. From this night forward, anger would be open, unfiltered, and far more dangerous. And I knew I had to prepare myself for the final, inevitable fallout of the war she'd started. The morning after the false police report confrontation arrived with an odd, unsettling stillness. There were no lingering sirens, no tense footsteps outside my door, no whispered rumors floating through the complex walkways. After months of non-stop tension and hypervigilance, the world around me felt unnervingly calm. But I knew better than to mistake silence for peace. Brenda's hateful stare before storming back to her unit replayed in my head all night, a clear promise that she would not forget, and she would not forgive the public defeat I'd handed her. I woke up early, exhausted, but unshaken. The weight that had sat on my chest since move-in day felt lighter for the first time in months. I pulled up the police documentation on my phone, rereading the official note that labeled her 911 call a deliberate false report, and saved every last detail to my cloud storage. After endless weeks of being forced to prove my innocence, I finally had authoritative third-party proof of her campaign against me. I was no longer the untrusted new tenant fighting vague suspicion. I was the victim of targeted harassment, officially documented and clear. Before heading into work, I stopped by the leasing office to update Jesse on everything that had happened the night before. I showed him the doorbell footage, the police warning documentation, and the final timeline of her escalating behavior. Jesse watched the video quietly, his face tight with remorse. I knew she was pushing boundaries, he admitted honestly, but I never thought she'd go this far. This crosses every line. I'm updating your tenant file immediately, flagging all prior complaints against you as unfounded and malicious. From this point forward, any future report from Mrs. Hale targeting your unit will be automatically flagged as retaliatory. Corporate will be notified of her pattern of false emergency abuse. His words were a long overdue validation. For months, the system had leaned into her lies, treating her paranoia as credible safety concern and my defense as tenant conflict. Now the record was finally correct. My rental history was clear. My name was clear, and management could no longer hide behind policy loopholes to ignore her harassment. In the days that followed, the shift in the complex community was undeniable. Word spread fast about the false police call and Brenda's exposed manipulation. Neighbors who'd avoided me for months began meeting my eyes again. The parents who crossed the walkway to steer clear of me nodded politely when we passed. The quiet judgment that had hung over my unit like a dark cloud slowly dissolved, replaced by quiet understanding. People finally saw the truth. I was never the suspicious. I was the neighbor being relentlessly targeted for no reason other than prejudice and resentment. Brenda disappeared from the common areas and no more lingering by the mailboxes, no more staring through her windows, no more pacing the walkways to monitor me. She stayed confined to her ground floor apartment, her presence muted. It was the first reprieve I'd had since. Still, I did not let my guard down. I kept my doorbell camera active 24/7, continued logging any unusual activity, and maintained my organized archive of evidence. I'd learned a brutal lesson over these past. Peace is not something you get to passively enjoy once someone. Safety is something you protect, consistently. Kayla celebrated with me over late-night calls, relieved that I'd finally broken the cycle of. You didn't just win this fight, she told me. You stopped her from doing this to the next new tenant who moved after you. She'll think twice before weaponizing the police and spreading lies. She was right. My victory was never just myself. By documenting every moment, refusing down, and exposing Brenda's past use, I'd closed the loophole she'd exploited. She could no longer hide behind vague, neighborly concern to harass new residents with. A week later, Jesse reached out to me with one lead. Corporate had reviewed the full case file, police warning, and the months of evidence. They'd issued Brenda an official permanent resident warning on her tenant record. Any further disruptive behavior, false complaints, or emergency service abuse would result in immediate lease termination. After 7 years of manipulating the system and terrorizing neighbors, she finally had real, enforceable consequences. That night, I stood on my second-floor balcony for the first time. The Atlanta evening breeze was soft and warm, the complex quiet and peaceful. I looked out over the parking lot where my night first begun, where Brenda had marched across the asphalt to judge me before I'd even unpacked. The space no threatening. I thought back to my day in the building, the hope I'd felt, the pride of my own space, the quiet dream of a stable life. That dream had been shattered almost instantly, replaced by months of fear, stress, and judgment. But through every difficult moment, I'd grown stronger. I'd learned to advocate for myself, my own proof, to refuse to let others' bias define my future. This experience. I would never again move into a new space without caution, without security measures, without awareness of how quickly prejudice and paranoia can twist a community against a person. I would never take quiet, uneventful days for granted. But those scars were not weaknesses. They were proof that I survived a relentless, unfair campaign targeting me simply to belong. She never acknowledged the harm she'd caused. She never confronted her own bias or guilty of her actions. Some people do not change, even when proven wrong. But she no longer hurt me. As I stepped back inside my apartment and closed the balcony door, to myself. My fresh start was no longer the perfect, naive dream imagined on movies. It was better. It was earned. It was resilient. After months of fighting to defend my right to live peacefully and so hard for, I finally had exactly what I'd wanted: safety, stability, and the quiet freedom to simply be myself, unjudged and unafraid.